Hey guys, it's Peggy of the Pigeon Letters. In this video, I'm going to show you 6 easy watercolor techniques that really bring your watercolors to life and add some texture, some different dimensions, so I'm really excited to go over these with you. There's 6 of them that we're going to do. So the first thing to know is that when we lay our color down, we want to make sure that we do a wet wash first. And that'll entail just getting the area that we'll be applying color nice and wet beforehand with just water, and then going back in and adding our pigment. And this will allow it to spread with more ease, and then we can get it nice and saturated, and then once that's done, we can move on to the technique itself. And the first one that we're going to do is with table salt. So I'm using this Morton salt. I'm gonna get kind of a generous amount in my hand, and then I'll just pinch that and sprinkle it over my watercolor while it's still wet. We need to let that dry so we can come back to it, and I'll show you the effect that it adds once it's dried, and it's pretty cool. So if you haven't done that already, that's a fun one. And then this next one that we're going to do, we're going to be using a masking fluid. This one is by Molotow, and you can get these where they dry clear or they dry blue. This one dries blue, and what you want to do is pump the tip, and that will get the masking fluid flowing. And so I'm just creating these little stars, just little lines with bursts and then some dots, and this is going to be a galaxy. So once that's finished, I'm going to let that dry because I don't want to put watercolor over the masking fluid while it's still wet. So we'll come back to that one as well. And moving on to the next, we're going to apply our wash, get our pigment in there, get it nice and saturated. And now we're going to use plastic wrap. And this creates one of my favorite techniques, and I don't do it nearly as often as I'd like to. So what you'll want to do is once this is nice and wet and saturated, you're going to grab a piece of plastic wrap, and this is something you can just grab from your kitchen, and you're going to kind of scrunch it a little bit, and then you're going to lay it down on your wet watercolor, and then you'll scrunch it a little bit more while it's on there, and then you're just going to leave this until it's completely dry, and then you'll remove it. So we're going back to our galaxy with our masking fluid. I first start with a pink color and get that in a few areas, and then I will apply some purple over that. And these are going to be like peekaboo through the darker areas because overall this piece is going to be pretty dark, mostly black. It's going to have some purple, going to have some dark blues coming out, and then at the very end I will add this blue, and then we'll let this dry. And for our next one, go ahead and saturate it with water and then your pigment, and then we're going to use oil for this one. And to do this, I'm just using a vegetable oil that I grabbed from my kitchen. Any oil would be just fine. The idea is that oil and water don't mix, so there will be some resistance. And what I'll do is pour a little oil into the cap of the bottle and then dip a Q-tip into the cap, and then I'm just going to set it onto the watercolor in just isolated areas. And you can do a lot of these, you can do a little bit. I'm just going to do a few so I can show you what that end technique looks like. We'll let that dry. And our next one, we're going to do adding color with water drops. So we get this nice and saturated, we pick up a different color with our brush, and then we just set it onto the wet area, and then it will begin to bleed. And so instead of moving it around to have it blend, it's going to blend on its own. And this creates a really pretty effect, and I highly recommend doing this with a lot of different types of work because before you know it, it's not just this small dot. It actually blends really nicely. And then if you want to add pigment in, because you'll notice eventually that the centers are not as bright as you began with, you can always just continue to layer in the center of all of those places that you initially set it. And before we get into the last one, I want to, now that this is dry, I'm going to take the plastic wrap off so you can see that it creates kind of a crystallized effect, and it's really cool. And that is one of my favorites. And then if we go over to the galaxy, we can start removing this masking fluid. And all you have to do is just rub it, and just with a firm pressure, and then what it does is it kind of balls up like you know how Elmer's glue would. And you can see that it exposes the white of the paper. So that's what the masking fluid will create. And then moving over to the salt, you can see that it's oxidized and it's created this really awesome texture in here. So you can brush some of these loose and you can see the starting point in some of those salt granules. So that's a really cool effect as well. For our last one, we're just going to do a splatter effect. And a lot of people have asked me how I get it to be an even texture, or how I get it to be not a glob, or how I get it to actually spray evenly. And I'm going to show you because it's super, super easy. So what you want to do is make sure that your brush is nice and wet. And you want to make sure it's got a lot of pigment on it and a lot of water on it. And then all you do is just hold it above the area that you want to splatter and then just tap the top of it. So it's not a flicking motion necessarily. It can be, but it's just super easy as long as your brush is wet enough, it's got enough paint on it. You just hold it over and tap. And this would also be, if you want a more realistic galaxy, using white with this technique would actually bring the galaxy to life a little bit more. So just a quick review. We've got the effects from our salt technique, and then we have our effects from our masking fluid, and then our plastic wrap, and then we have our oil and our water drops, and then our splatter. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more tutorials like this, please thumbs up and subscribe. And I can't wait to see you guys next time.